Hey everyone. You know, when I typed in the title for today's stream, I thought to myself, am I really going to talk about this? Because it would be so much easier to just talk about the fact that the quarterly GDP growth is 3% annualized, or continue talking about Sydney Sweeney, or what's going on in Cincinnati. All of these things would be a lot safer to talk about. But you know what I also realized lately? I feel like I haven't been as brave as I can be in talking about some of the things that I need to. And I want to bring clarity to some areas where I feel like there's a lack of clear thinking and is causing a lot more hostility and hatred and, frankly, scary behavior and statements. And I feel like I have an ability to reach people. So I want to use that ability responsibly. And you know what we're going to do? We're going to jump straight into the clip that I want to react to today, because even though it's not like the thing making into mainstream news headlines, it's important to talk about it. And I think you'll see why in a moment. So just check out this clip.
Hitler.
What if the Jewish did something to the Germans that made them act a certain way, but nobody wants to talk about it? Like the Jews don't want to take accountability.
Oh,
They don't.
That's
yes.
I'm with you on that one.
Okay.
That's why like
I'm with you on
there
that
was
one.
up to something, so the Germans wanted to take them out.
Like payback.
It had to be something. Like Germans wanted to take them out, all of them out.
They damn near
Martin
wiped
likes
everybody
Haitians
off the map.
Something.
They started it.
To get somebody
Damn, he
that
cheesed
mad.
Here
it
we
hard.
go.
Like, yeah, talk shit about them. Eat them up.
The Holocaust was the only way he can take out a huge population, like a huge amount of Jews all in one setting. But I already know what's going on. Like, I'm not dumb. Like, I know, like, the Jews did something. That's why they sent up here. They're trying to take back, like, they're trying to take back and get repercussions, especially from America, like, from Americans. So they're taking over the government and stuff like that.
I'm telling you, how do we take them down?
How do we take them down?
Yeah.
I mean,
Gotta kill the motherfuckers.
I hate to say it.
My bad, y'all.
Genocide.
My bad.
Hitler, he had the plan, but his plan was just too, like, very, like, gruesome, if we can say it.
Listen,
He said,
he had to do what he had to do.
But he had to do it.
He was like,
Listen, he was trying to save the world.
I
It didn't
agree.
work out. He did. Listen, he just did
I
what he
mean,
had to do.
Jews are the reason why the healthcare system and everything around us in the government is collapsing, because they're sitting up here stealing away from the American people.
Okay. So there's a bunch of statements, and we're going to revisit this later in the stream because some people are going to join later and break down all of the problems with the argument that she's making. But before we even talk about that, I want to talk about the broader trend that I've observed. Now, I'm someone who wasn't into politics at all before about a year ago. And I never really thought about Jewish people. Like, I was just like, Jewish people are just people. Like, what's the big deal? And as I've gotten into politics, I've noticed this trend in people just talking about Jewish people a lot, despite Jewish people being 2% of the population in America. And there just being a lot of accusations against Jewish people. And this has been amplifying since the start of October 7th because of the involvement of Israel and what they're doing in Gaza and the relationship and the conflict between the Palestinian people and the Jewish people in Israel. And I remember first when I was seeing this, I just didn't even have any context. I was like, why are people constantly talking about Jews? Like, what is going on here? Why is there this fixation on a very tiny minority of the US population? And then over time, I saw very aberrant behavior coming out of, in particular, Black people. And I felt particularly connected to this because I'm Black. So we saw the Kanye going on his rant around a few weeks before the Super Bowl, talking about Jewish people. And he did this tweet storm saying a lot of things that, saying that, I mean, sorry, we can't hold back, right? I wanted you guys to know what's been going on, like saying that you need to whip Jewish people like slaves. And Kanye saying that Jewish people have done all these things to him. And periodically I see these spurts of energy and these spurts of conversation around Jewish people. And I see in some circles, right, because I'm on X and I'm in sort of right-wing circles, I see this happening within segments of the right where people will go from hey, I don't like what Israel is doing, to some camps saying, yeah, the Jewish people are running the world and they're controlling everything and they're controlling information, and every problem you can tie back to the Jews. And people say this kind of stuff, and they say it casually, and they say it emphatically and confidently as if it's so obvious to them. And besides the shockingness of such statements, I would look at these statements and be like, okay, where are people even coming from? Because I don't want to just immediately attack what people are saying. I want to actually understand where they're coming from and understand, is this even a logically coherent point of view? And before I go into this particular argument, I actually want to give you guys some background, because I was reflecting today and I realized that I actually have this unique experience of having lived in areas where there was genuine tension between Jewish people and Black people, because I grew up in New York. I'm originally from the Bronx, and then I moved to a place called Rockland County. And I went to a high school called Spring Valley High School. Now, Spring Valley High School is not a good high school. About 66% of people graduated from high school while I was there. Now it's around 60%. And there's an interesting ethnic composition of Spring Valley High School, because it's in a district that is majority white, and the majority of the white population is Jewish, and the majority of the Jewish population is Hasidic. So it's somewhere like, I think like 60 to 65% white, and the majority of that is Jewish, and around 20% of the population is Black. Now, some African-American Black, but a lot of them Haitian immigrants. And because of that, that meant that the majority of the tax base was paid for by people who were Jewish. But despite the majority of the tax base being provided for by Jewish taxpayers, the majority of those Jewish taxpayers actually didn't send their kids to public schools. They sent their kids to private schools. So every year while I was there from, let's say like 2004 to 2008, 2005, 2008, somewhere around there. Every year we would have a big fight over the budget. And I don't mean like me personally be involved. Just in general, there was a big fight over the budget, because just look neutrally at the incentives. If you're a Jewish taxpayer and you're a Hasidic Jew and you're sending your kids to a private school, it doesn't make a lot of sense to be paying a high tax rate for public schools that are low quality and only graduating 66% of students that you don't even have your kids enrolled in. Right. So I solely understand the perspective of Hasidic Jews in Rockland County. And then on the flip side, if you were a Black student or like a Haitian immigrant who was in these public schools, and the majority of the funding from those public schools came from Hasidic Jews, well, from your perspective, it's like, oh, well, this ethnic group doesn't want to fund this school, and I am negatively impacted by them not wanting to fund that school. Right. So this is just a clash of incentives. It's misaligned incentives. The people paying for the public education aren't sending their kids to public school. And the people who are not carrying the majority of the weight of public school education are sending their kids to public schools. And they're not benefiting from, sometimes I remember the Hasidic Jewish community, they would want to expand funding for busing, but use that busing to send their kids to private school. Again, understandably. So every year there was this tension, and at the time I didn't pick up on a lot of it being explicitly racial. It was definitely charged every single year, but it didn't feel especially racial. I don't know if I was just insulated from it. I don't know if I was unaware of it, but I was reflecting. It was like, wow, there's this interesting relationship between Black and Jewish people in the micro level in that particular school district, and in the macro level where I see a lot of the Black community have a lot of hostility toward Jewish people. And I saw it with Kanye. We see it in this clip that I just played. And I actually don't know where it comes from. And it's actually quite odd to me. I mean, I have Jewish friends. I've never thought anything. I was like, oh, Jewish. Cool. That's interesting. I've been to Shabbats. I think it's actually really cool what the Jewish people have been able to create, because it's a very disciplined, cohesive culture that has survived through a lot of hardship. And I look at the Black community, I say, well, if I think of the two communities that arguably have gone through the most hardship, at least in modernity, it's Jewish people and Black people. But rather than there being a relationship of camaraderie, or if not camaraderie, at least like a mutual understanding of the hardship that these respective groups have gone through, or I would even dare say the Black community learning from the Jewish community, given how successful the Jewish community has been despite the hardship that they've been through. As opposed to that, instead, there's a lot of hostility and suspicion, and it's just weird. Like, I hate to just reduce my analysis to weird. Like, I genuinely don't get it. And I would love to actually understand this at a deeper level, because I look at this and I'm like, well, if Black people were brought to America in chains, and Black people have gone through hardship since the 15th century in America, wouldn't you want to look at other groups that have thrived under hardship and oppression that have been successful despite that and say, hey, we actually need to be emulating that group more, not alienating them? But instead, I consistently see Black people being hostile toward Jews. What is that? Seriously, what is, like, if I actually look at the things that have allowed Jewish people to thrive despite going through the Holocaust and what happened in Russia before that, and being persecuted all across Europe, and we'll get to the reasons why in a moment. Yeah, if my parents are from Ghana, so I don't have the same lineage of hardship that a Black American does, but to the extent that there's racism and to the extent that there is systemic racism, I should be someone who's experiencing that, right? And I look at it as like, okay, well, Jewish people went through all this horrible stuff, and Jewish people are overrepresented in the highest echelons of political influence and economic influence and education. They're really thriving. And why are they thriving? I think it's because they have a strong moral code. They have a strong sense of community. They have strong standards. They have rituals that keep the community cohesive. And unfortunately, the Black community doesn't have that in America. It's really sad. And in fact, since around the time of the New Deal, or maybe you could say the Civil Rights Act in 1964, the amount of Black, I don't even want to call it conservatism, but adherence to traditions that would preserve the family unit and keep man and woman together, and I think were actually ingredients for success, have slowly been eroded culturally in the Black community, I've observed. And yeah, now there's just high rates of abortion in the Black community. There's high rates of children being born out of wedlock. There's high rates of divorce, and there's low rates of pair bonding. These are all things that are not good. There's a lot of things, there's a lot of features that I observe in the Black community. It's like, man, we can like fix this stuff. A lot of this is about having healthier cultural software that is more likely to preserve the family unit and create strong values and celebrate excellence rather than justify misbehavior. And I don't see a lot of that cultural software there. I do see a lot of that cultural software in the Jewish community. But rather than that being a source of inspiration, I see it be a source of a lot of adversity. Hostility between, I don't even think it's two-way hostility from what I've seen. I've seen a lot of it's just one-way hostility from Black people toward Jews. So I ask again, what is that? So that's a more macro observation, and I have observed it in my personal life, as well as observed it in clips like these. Now I want to get into this clip because I think it evinces several logical fallacies that I really want to point out, because, there's a young Black lady who is mostly doing the talking in this clip, and it's from a popular podcast, by the way. This podcast has over 1.5 million subscribers. So this is not like this is not just some group of people who no one's listening to. This is a very influential podcast in some circles. So I thought it's important to address what's going on in here. And it was a young Black woman who was doing the majority of the speaking here. And I don't know what her educational background is. I don't know how old she is. She looks like she might be in her late teens or early 20s. And my worry with this upcoming generation, and more generally, I think the state of American education, but especially with this upcoming generation, is they're learning more from social media than they are in school. And school's not even teaching them critical thinking and logic and the formal disciplines that actually allow someone to have a sovereign mind and see the world clearly. And I think it's really evidenced in the statement. I'm going to break down each part of the statement to show you where all the logical fallacies are, because there's a lot of them. So let's start here.
About Hitler.
What if the Jewish did something to the Germans that made them act a certain way, but nobody wants to talk about it. Like the Jews don't want to take accountability.
Oh,
They don't.
That's.
yes.
I'm with you on that one.
Okay.
I'm curious.
That's why.
saying I
That's
used to
why.
work for
Like
I'm with you on
they
that
was
one.
up to something, so the Germans wanted to take them out.
Okay, cool. So let's start here, right? So I'm gonna try to genuinely make a good faith interpretation of her argument, right? So let's just give the strongest version of her argument before we engage with it. Her argument is, okay, well, the Holocaust happened and Hitler did really bad things, but if he did bad things, she's saying it must have been in reaction to something. Okay, so first let's talk about the place of Jewish people in 20th century Europe and in modernity in America too, right? Because one thing that I think often it's like for some reasons it's a third rail to even identify this, but it's empirically true that Jewish people are statistically overrepresented in certain elite sectors like media, finance, academia, or politics. For example, in politics, only about 2% of the population of the United States is Jewish, but 8 to 10% of senators are Jewish. And some of them are like Bernie Sanders, who is secular but ethnically Jewish, and then some of them are both ethnically Jewish and religiously Jewish as well. So that's just empirically true. Jewish people are empirically overrepresented. Of course, I'm not speaking of all Jewish people. There are many Jewish people who are middle class or lower middle class or have nothing to do with government. But it's worth just noting that. And it's not a bad thing. It just means that the Jewish people have been particularly successful in America. And that was also true to an extent in Germany at the time where Hitler rose to power. And Jewish people were particularly influential and rose up in the ranks in finance. Now, something that's often omitted is the fact that historically, Jewish people were not even allowed to take on roles in society, and they were legally restricted in many countries from even doing things outside of finance. So that's part of the reason why Jewish people really excelled in certain sectors, because those were the only sectors they even had access to, right? But there's a difference between observing something empirically and making a false perception of something that is empirically true. Okay? There's a big difference between saying, well, 2% of the population in America is Jewish, but 10% of the senators are Jewish. There's a difference between saying that and saying, well, the Jews run everything. Okay? One is an empirical observation, one is a false perception. Or if we don't even want to move to calling it a false perception, at least it's a subjective claim as opposed to an objective assertion. So she's moving very quickly from saying, and later in the clip, Jewish people are overrepresented in certain sectors of society, to Jewish people are running everything. Like there's a big gap between being overrepresented and controlling the world. Okay, so that's one of the first logical fallacies that stood out here. And you can point out that overrepresentation is real, right? That's not anti-Semitic or conspiratorial. That's strictly descriptive. What's dangerous is how you respond to that and interpret it. And what the lady is essentially claiming here is, well, Jewish people are really influential relative to the size of their population, and Hitler did something really bad, so they must have done something really bad with all their power. Right? So it goes step 1, group X is disproportionately influential. Step 2, therefore group X is doing something wrong or oppressive. Step 3, therefore it's understandable or even justified that people act violently. Okay, that's a moral reasoning error. And it's a moral non sequitur, first of all, because not everything that happens to people is morally justified. And actually, this is a podcast. As I understand it, the host of this podcast is very sympathetic to the Palestinian plight. It's very sympathetic to the situation going on in Gaza, understandably, right? Like, it's horrible. There are tens of thousands of people starving and dying. And regardless of what you think needs to be done to eliminate Hamas, it's objectively, morally reprehensible and horrible what's happening in Gaza, period. And you wouldn't say, oh, well, the kid who had a bomb dropped on them deserves it because the Palestinian people elected Hamas in 2006. So anything that happens to them is morally justifiable. You would never say that. That's a moral non sequitur. And they're using the same kind of moral non sequitur when they're talking about the Jews in the 20th century. So The second fallacy here is called a just world fallacy. And the just world fallacy asserts that we live in a just world, so anything that happens to someone, they deserve, which again is not true. We live in a very chaotic world. All sorts of bad things happen purely because of entropy, purely because of luck. And there's simply no rational way to reason why, a little child gets raped, or a little boy or a little girl has a bomb dropped on them, or is killed by a neighboring tribe. There is no moral justification for that. We don't live in a just world. The idea of justice and morality is a human imposition on the world. The world itself is the world. It's a brutal, nasty, savage world. That's what nature is. If you look at animals in nature, they do all kinds of messed up stuff to each other. So it's important for us as humans to have some sort of conception of justice that we move toward, but we shouldn't be deluded and say, well, we live in a just world, so anything that happens to someone is morally justified. Again, people would never say that of a little kid in Palestine. So why would you ever say that of the Jews and what Hitler did to the Jews? But even going further, again, let's roll this clip back. Okay.
Jewish did something to the Germans that made them act a certain way, but
okay, so what if the Jewish people did something to the Germans that made them act in a certain way? What exactly could the Jewish people have done that would justify being put in ovens and concentration camps and starved and rounded up like chattel and killed in mass? What exactly would that thing be? She doesn't even identify what the thing is. And then everyone sits around, and I understand kind of like, I guess on a just kind of like there's something exciting about taboos being discussed, and people are just like, oh man, I can't believe she said that. But no one sits there and says, hey, so you're saying, what if the Jewish people did something? What exactly do you think that they did that justified this kind of behavior? And if you study history, there's this interesting trend. This happened in Russia, it happened in Germany, and I fear that it's happening now, where it's like, you start with good times. And you guys have maybe heard the adage, strong men create good times, times create weak men create hard times create good, strong men, and then strong men create good times, right? So you've heard that cycle. Well, what was going on in the earliest 20th century in Germany? Germany was on the decline. They're going through economic hardship. And in times of economic hardship, people look for a common enemy. And in this case, the common enemy that they identified were Jewish people. Why? Well, I think probably the most accurate representation of why is because Jewish people stand out, right? Because they are a very well-defined group, where they literally wear yarmulkes. I remember growing up in Rockland County, when you saw a Hasidic Jewish person, you knew it because they styled their hair in a certain way. They were always wearing suits, even if it was 100 degrees outside. They were wearing black suits and white shirts, and they stuck together, right? So they really stood out. And in my area, they were also really successful. Why? Because, well, again, they have strong cultural software. They have rules that unify the community. They have standards of conduct in their own community. They probably pass along information on how to be successful and how to have a good life from father to son. They had strong family units. They had all these features that, yes, are going to be conducive to success over a long term. Now, I imagine if you were a German person living at that time and you were struggling to feed your family, and maybe you saw a Jewish family next in the next home over, and you saw that they were doing well. What happens when you see other people doing well while you're struggling? The natural response is jealousy, and then that jealousy can become hostility, and the hostility is born out of suspicion. So people look at like, oh, well, that group is doing well. That group must have done something to me. If I'm not succeeding and that group is succeeding, it must be because they're taking something away from me. And there's a kernel, just a kernel, of truth to this, right? Because just like in my situation, I came from a school district that was majority Hasidic Jews, minority Black, but the Jewish taxpayers were paying for the public school funding that Black students relied upon. So there was a mismatch of incentives. But in that case, there wasn't some Jewish conspiracy or plot to hurt Black people. They were just trying to take care of their own. And that's kind of the double-edged sword when you have a strong community. When you have a strong community, that means you very strongly identify with taking care of your people. So me personally growing up, I never felt any hostility toward the Jewish people. I'm like, okay, yeah, they're just like, they send their kids to private school, so they want more funding to go to private school. Like, it makes perfect sense. So again, we can empirically observe people's incentives without going so far as to say things like, oh, well, they control the world, or they're trying to hurt other people, or this is some sort of conspiracy plot to cause a cultural degeneration of everyone but their group. But again, none of that got challenged in this clip. Instead, it's just a bunch of, I mean, people literally joking about genocide, literally joking about killing an entire group of people, and no one asking the logical question, which is, hey, what do you think that they did that justified Hitler's response exactly? Could you clarify? That's all that's needed. And it doesn't even need to be hostile. It can be just a genuinely curious question. What are you saying? But no one asked that question. Let's continue with the clip here.
Nobody wants to talk about it. Like, the Jews don't want to take accountability.
Oh!
They don't.
Yes.
I'm with you on that one.
Okay.
That's why, like,
I'm with you on
there
that
was
one.
up to something, so the Germans wanted to take them out.
Like payback.
It had to be something. Like, Germans wanted to take them out, all of them out.
They damn near
Mara
wiped
likes
everybody
pictures
off
now.
the map.
Something.
They started it.
It's like, it's somebody
Damn,
that
he's
mad.
Here we
choosing hard.
go.
Like, yeah, talk shit about them.
Yeah,
You see, like, it's just a bunch of like nodding and like, yeah, we're talking about it. It's like, yeah, you're talking about it, but this is not intellectually rigorous at all. It's like, yeah, congrats. I mean, look, I'm radically pro free speech. I want people to talk about everything because I believe that if ideas are not challenged in the town square, then bad ideas get to fester in the alleyway. So we need to have all the ideas in the town square. So if people want to question whether it was really 6 million Jews killed during the Holocaust, or if people want to say that they think that the founding of Israel was a mistake, like, let's get all those ideas out and let's have the ideas tested in the battleground of ideas. I don't think anything should be off topic. But simply making a contrarian argument doesn't make the argument good. Like, you need to actually make a logical argument from first principles, not just give the opposite of the mainstream narrative. That's a problem with contrarian positions. People who take contrarian positions, they often don't have a quality position. They settle for being courageous enough to say the taboo thing without being intellectually rigorous enough to make sure that the taboo thing that they're saying is actually true and holds any merit. But there's no examination of that in this clip.
The Holocaust was the only way he can take out a huge population, like a huge amount of Jews all in one setting. But I already know what's going on. Like, I'm not dumb. Like, I know, like, the Jews did something. That's why they sent up here. They're trying to take back, like, and get repercussions, especially from America, like from.
Okay, so then she says, now she's talking about modern day, and she said the Jews are trying to take back and get repercussions. And by the way, the word is reparations, not repercussions, that I think she's referring to. It's like, okay, so now your argument is that Jewish people, in response to what happened during the Holocaust, came to America and are trying to get reparations by taking over the government and controlling everything. So part of this is another logical fallacy, which is called group attribution error. Or actually, that's a cognitive bias. It's actually called composition fallacy. And the composition fallacy goes like this. It's saying, because something is true of part of a group, it must be true of all of a group, which is simply not true. Let's look at the conflict in Gaza, for example. Right? Many of these more extreme people who take these more extreme positions say stuff like, oh, it's the Jews who are doing this, and see what's going on in Gaza, I told you. But they don't introduce any nuance to what even the Jews means, because the Jews is actually a range of different religious sects and ethnic groups and viewpoints that are all coalesced under an identity, but there's a lot of difference. For example, in Israel, there's a right wing and there's a left wing. There are more liberal Jews, there are conservative Jews. There are Jews who are secular and don't observe the faith, and then there are Jews who are religious Jews. There are Hasidic Jews. There are ultra-Orthodox Jews. there's all sorts of different Jews. So what are we even saying when we say things like, oh, well, the Jews in response to the Holocaust are trying to do something in America? Right? We got to be precise about what we mean. And that's part of the problem with contrarian thinking. It's like they settle for just being contrarian, not for actually being intellectually rigorous. We're not even being clear about what the terms are. Right? There's even in Israel, there's something like, I think it was only like 51% of people in a survey in May supported continued military operations in Gaza. I mean, right now there are protests in Israel by Jewish people against the actions of the Israeli government. Do those protests represent all of the whole? No, because just like America, it's a democracy. There's a range of viewpoints. So people say these stuff that like they use these overloaded terms like, oh, whites did this, blacks do this, Jews did this. And we're talking about millions of people, not all of whom agree. And I see statements like this is like, there's essentially saying, oh, Jews control everything. It's like Jews don't even control all Jews, right? Like there's not even agreement in Israel on what Israel is doing. So again, we got to be precise in what we're talking about. We got to look at like what do these category statements actually mean when we say Jews? Are you talking about ultra-Orthodox Jews? Are you talking about Hasidic Jews? Are you talking about Jews of the generation immediately after the Holocaust? Are you talking about Jews in the millennial generation? Like, what are you actually saying? But again, it doesn't get challenged, so we don't get to a deeper discussion. Instead, it's just a bunch of young women who, I don't know what their background is. And I'm not saying they need to be experts to talk about this, but if we're going to talk about it, we need to be treating these conversations seriously, not treating this like a conversation in a bar just between friends where we're bandying taboo jokes that would get us canceled. Like, no, you're talking to a subscriber base of over 1.5 million people. Now, I will say part of this is a reaction to something. And when people say, oh, well, when they have suspicion of Jewish people, I think part of what they're responding to is some of the in-group preferences of Jewish people more generally, and some of the actions by Jewish politicians specifically. For example, last year, there was a bill passed in the Congress and the House of Representatives with strong bipartisan support. And part of that bill adopted the International Holocaust Remembrance Association's definition of anti-Semitism. And part of that definition of anti-Semitism was assertions that the state of Israel shouldn't exist. So you might believe, like, I totally understand why from many Jewish people's perspective, it's scary to hear people who say, oh, Israel shouldn't even exist, right? Because a lot of those people are anti-Semites. But even if these people are anti-Semites, we shouldn't be putting it into a law that you can't criticize a foreign government or say that that foreign nation shouldn't exist. That just shouldn't be against the law. It shouldn't be against the law, for that matter, to say that America shouldn't exist. I disagree. I think things that exist should exist because they do exist. And, people say that America's on stolen land. I mean, yes, it is on stolen land, and that land was stolen from Native Americans were stealing land from one another too. Like, humans have been stealing land from one another and hurting people since Adam met Eve and Cain met Abel. So it's like, yeah, we have an ugly shared inheritance of humanity. It's not particular to any group. But there are actions that some people in the Jewish community have tried to do defensively that need to be checked, because we shouldn't be passing bills in Congress that make it illegal to criticize the state of Israel. And a similar bill almost got passed earlier this year, but it got shut down because there was a lot of public outcry. So yeah, within all groups, there are segments of people who go too far. And oftentimes the reason that they go too far is because they're afraid and they're trying to look out for their own interests and they're following their own incentives and they're trying to be defending themselves. They're trying to defend themselves. And just because someone's trying to defend themselves doesn't mean they get to do whatever. So that bill did pass the House, which was scary. I don't know why it didn't get introduced into the Senate floor. I think maybe people just abandoned it. Maybe it lost political steam. But that bill should not pass. We shouldn't be putting it into law that some third-party organization gets to define what anti-Semitism is. That just shouldn't happen. Similarly, you guys remember the deportations of these pro-Palestine activists? There was a deportation of one woman, Ramisa Ozturk, who the only offense that she committed was writing writing an op-ed in her college newspaper criticizing the state of Israel for what the government was doing in Gaza. That was the only thing that she did. Right? She didn't say anything anti-Semitic. She was critiquing the actions of the state of Israel. And then a bunch of masked ICE agents arrested her in broad daylight on the street in Boston and just literally threw her into a van. It was a really, really terrifying sight. That shouldn't be happening. I also think that some of the things that Trump is doing with Columbia and Harvard in the name of combating anti-Semitism are going too far. And I do think that these institutions of higher learning have been ideologically captured, and we're not having students think critically about these things. And I think they've been wokeified. And I do think there's cultural rot that needs to be resolved in Columbia and Harvard. But I also think that Trump is going too far and using anti-Semitism as the reason to withhold federal funding and require certain staffing requirements in Harvard and Columbia. And it's just going too far. And I think it's just an overextension of presidential powers. So there are things that I think certain members of a Jewish community do that do need to be checked, of course. Just like there are members of the white community or the Black community who need to be checked. And that's not the same thing as saying, oh, well, Jewish people are in positions of power, therefore they control the world, therefore they're abusing that power, therefore Hitler must have done something that was justified. Okay, moral non sequiturs. And we need to keep in mind the concept of proportionality. What is a proportional response? And when we say someone is abusing their power, who specifically, how specifically, and what specifically is the problem? We need to be specific. Let's continue with the clip here. Where can one see the original clip? Well, I played it at the beginning of the stream. So if you want to go watch the earlier part of the stream, you'll get to see the
Americans. So they're taking over the government and stuff like that.
I'm telling you, how do we take them down?
How do we take them down?
Okay, so now she says, how do we take them down? Again, who's them? Is them the secular Jewish liberal woman in LA who is disconnected from her Jewish family and is charting off a very different course and doesn't really follow politics and maybe voted for Kamala, but it wasn't a big deal to her? Is that the Jewish person? Is that the them that you need to take down? What are we talking about? That's why I really hate identitarian politics and tribalism and speaking of people in terms of groups. Because yeah, sometimes in statistical analysis, you need to talk about groups. So for example, when I say 2% of the population is Jewish, but it's 8 to 10% of the Senate, it's like, yeah, we got to talk about large numbers of people, but we need to be very careful about prescribing solutions that are assigned to entire groups of people, especially when we're talking about, I guess, potential violence they're advocating here. Because you're talking about having a very extreme response to the actions of a few members of a large group of people. So it's like, how do we take them down? Who is them?
Yeah.
I mean,
Gotta kill the motherfuckers.
I hate to say it.
My bad, y'all.
Genocide.
My bad.
Hitler, he had the plan, but his plan was just too very gruesome, if we can say it.
Listen,
He said,
he had to do what he had to do.
But he had to do it.
He was like,
Listen,
Okay, that's like, I don't even think I need to point out a logical fallacy. I mean, he's literally saying he had to do what he had to do. Yes. So what he's saying is he had to round up a bunch of people and put them in concentration camps and mass kill women and pregnant women and children and men. For what exactly? Because what, Jewish people were going to take over the world? What is even the claim here? But people just say these things and it's just like, it's emotional venting. It's not actually, they're not even assigning causes. They're just saying, oh, there must have been a cause. And that's enough. They just settle for that.
trying to save the world.
I
It didn't
agree.
work out. He just didn't.
I mean, Jews are the reason why the healthcare system and everything around us in the government is collapsing, because they're sitting up here stealing away from the American people.
And that's the end of the clip. So her last statement is, I mean, it's like she just makes a statement, provides no argument, and the clip is basically her just making bigger and bigger statements. And yeah, these are not arguments, they're just assertions. And again, I'm not saying we shouldn't be talking about anything. Like, we should talk about everything. And I do think that I've noticed on X, I've seen several accounts by people who, how do I say this, habitually label any critique of the state of Israel or any questions people ask about the role of Jewish people in the media or politics and say it's anti-Semitism, right? And the problem is when you call everything anti-Semitism, you start to polarize people, and then people become suspicious and then hostile because they feel like they're being silenced. And I think those people, and these are Jewish people, and some of them are maybe not even Jewish, but are pro-Zionism. Those people are actually doing harm to their cause when they do that, because when you call everything racism, it's hard to see actual racists. When you call everything anti-Semitism, it's hard to see actual anti-Semites. So that's not a helpful position either. And I see the sort of causal chain of effect where people feel like they can't talk about anything. So they feel resentful about the fact that they feel like they'll get canceled for talking about anything. So then they start talking about those things, and they're so excited to talk about those things, but they're not even worried about talking about those things in a logical fashion. They're just releasing this repressed energy that and just clearing air that they feel was stifled. And then people who, Jewish people observe that happening, and they're like, see, I told you these people are anti-Semitic. And then they call everyone an anti-Semite, and then tensions just build until no one's even hearing each other, and everyone just thinks that the other side is being hateful. Like, I understand the mechanics of this, and yet this is a podcast that this guy is hosting. Okay. There's a responsibility when you are airing controversial beliefs in the public square to make sure that you're creating appropriate tension in the opposite direction. It's really important. Not because you need to prove someone wrong, but just because you want to make sure that you're framing taboo ideas in context so you can allow people to actually think for themselves and actually form their own conclusions about what's going on. Rather than just settling for, I said the controversial thing, look at me, I talked about the third rail thing, and leaving it there. And in fairness, I did not watch the whole podcast. It's possible that he challenged them in the rest of the podcast. I would be surprised if he did, because I've seen other clips from this particular podcast host, and he seems to take a very suspicious view of Jewish people. So I imagine this is actually just in alignment with his views, so he didn't feel the need to challenge it or propose the opposite perspective. But yeah, it's just not helpful. It's not actually helpful. And if you do think that any group is misbehaving, right? Like if you have critiques of the Black community and you think that Black people are engaged in victimhood, or if you have critiques of the white community and you think that they're engaged in white supremacy, or if you have critiques of the Jewish community and you think they're engaged in censorship, you should feel empowered to say that, but we should be demanding a higher standard of discourse when we talk about these things, so that we're not just accepting ideas because they're contrarian, but actually because they're true. So just wanted to talk about this because this is one of those things that it's never going to be talked about in the mainstream until things get really extreme. And I just wanted to lend my voice to the conversation before we get to that point, because yeah, besides the obvious, how obviously shocking the clip is, it needs to be addressed, and not addressed with more than just moral outrage, right? Because outrage doesn't fix stuff, right? We need more than outrage. We need to actually engage with it, and we need to show as calmly and sanely as possible what is actually illogical about some of these arguments. So I hope my rant on this helped you see. Okay, now we're going to get into some of the comments. The chat is quieter today. I don't know if everyone feels on edge talking about this stuff. I'm not sure if you guys followed me. I know this was a bit of a dense thing to follow, and some of you, you didn't watch the whole clip at the beginning, so maybe you're coming in midway. It's kind of hard to follow what I'm saying, but I hope you get the idea, which is that yeah, there's such a thing as a good argument, and we should look for good arguments. Like, not every argument is equally valid. And unfortunately, we're not teaching people clear and critical thinking principles. So unfortunately, ideas just run wild, and people think that their ideas are good just because they feel them strongly. And no, there's a formal discipline of logic. It goes back to the age of Aristotle. We need to be teaching it to people, and we need to be identifying ideas that are illogical or arguments that are not fully fleshed out. And we need to be specific about how they're illogical and how they're not fleshed out. Fisher of Man says the sex metrics are directly correlated with intelligence, and intelligence varies by ethnicity. Yeah, that's true. And Ashkenazi Jews have some of the highest IQs on average. So that's also a fact. And sometimes when we get into conversations about race and intelligence, people stop at saying, because I guess maybe because it's taboo, it's like they'll say stuff like Black people on average have lower IQs. And yeah, that's true. That's just been tested. That's empirically true. But also what people will do is they'll attach a false perception and they'll say stuff like, oh, it's inherently genetic. And the scientific consensus is that IQ differences are driven by environment. So the environments that white people and Black people and I guess depends on what segment of the Jewish population we're talking about, grow in, are conducive or less conducive in some cases to higher IQs. So yeah, there are differences in between the various races, and to an extent, race is a social construct, but it has biological correlates, but it is also a social construct, and IQ. And yeah, we should be talking about those things, and we should also be talking about the fact that IQ is malleable across generations. So, for example, there's one study that found that if you take a Black kid and you have a white family adopt them, the Black kid will, on average, have higher IQ than the median Black child who's not adopted into a white family, rather. Right. So, again, we can talk about taboo things. I'm okay talking about anything, but we want to make sure that we also understand appropriate context so that if we're going to talk about it, we got to talk about all of it, and we got to talk about the reasons why things are true. Yes, it would be like saying Black people must have done something to make it so that they deserve slavery, which again would be an insane moral non sequitur, right? Because we don't live in a just world. We don't live in a world where everyone gets what they deserve, right? Some people are born into horrible circumstances and die at 3 years old. That's a sad reality of the world. Some people are born into hard circumstances and they become billionaires. Why does the former happen to some people and the latter happen to other people? I don't know, right? Like the Christians would say it's part of God's plan. The Hindus would say it's part of the endless, or the Buddhists would say it's part of samsara and the constant cycle of incarnation into this mortal plane and suffering and reincarnation and shedding your karma. I don't know, but I know that from what we can observe, there's not a clear, there's no morality in nature, unfortunately. But so yeah, you wouldn't make the argument that anything that happens to someone is something that they deserve, right? And to hear a Black person saying this, like, imagine if someone said, yeah, well, everything that happened to your ancestors, they deserved it. They must have deserved it, right? Because if these things happened to the Jews, they must have deserved it. So shouldn't the logic follow, right? It's an insane logic tree, right? Sometimes just unjust, evil things happen. That's part of the world. So let's not morally justify these things. Yes, it is a wild title, but as you can see, the clip was wild. So hopefully the title prepared you for what you watch in that clip. Thank you, Taekwon. I appreciate you. I'm going to put this comment on stream because I'm sweating right now, guys. This is a scary topic to talk about. I haven't been as lucid and eloquent as I'd like to be. Because it's scary. Yeah, and I'm nervous talking about this stuff because I don't want to be misinterpreted. Like, I'm really trying to come from love. I'm really trying to bring some sanity and clarity to this whole situation. And maybe there are Jewish people watching who are offended about the particular way that I said something. Maybe there are Black people who are offended by the particular way that I said something, or white people, or whatever. And yeah, forgive me for saying things imperfectly. I hope you can see I'm really trying to come from a genuinely good faith place and help people think clearly about these things. So Taekwon says, so refreshing that someone has the intestinal fortitude to discuss topics addressed on this platform. This should be a template for everyone to emulate. Thank you. That is actually one of my favorite acknowledgments that I've ever gotten while streaming. So I appreciate that. Thelo Savage, I now remember you actually sent me a message offering to help. So just so you know, I saw your message. I appreciate the offer to help. I'm at a point where I'm actually focusing on some projects that I'm building in the background that will be announced pretty soon. I'm not really focused on bringing a producer onto my stream or expanding my team or anything like that. I will at some point, but now is just not the time. Right now, I'm still a one-man operation pretty much. Bitcoin Geezer says maybe the reality is there's a subset of black people and other races. Thank you for saying that. It's a subset. It's not all black people. It's not all other races, right? I think most people are normal. They're not thinking about Jewish people. They're not thinking about race all the time or ethnicity. They're just like thinking about what do I need to achieve my goals and buy a house one day and feed my family and get promoted at work. I think the majority of people are not actually in these deep pockets of the internet talking about this super controversial stuff. So thank you for saying a subset. But he goes on to say that have no issue with this thinking and would like to see it happen to all groups of white people. It's simply an arrogant justification of what these groups of people would like to see happen to those who disagree with their ideology. Yeah, this is also a good I think it's a cognitive bias. It's a cognitive bias called motivated reasoning. And motivated reasoning is when you just emotionally decide what your conclusion is, and then you make all your arguments to just justify the conclusion you've already arrived at, which is the opposite of scientific thinking, right? Because scientific thinking is you might have a hypothesis, it's not a conclusion, but you have a theory, and then you run a bunch of tests, or if you can't run a bunch of tests because you're talking about history, you go do a bunch of research and you look at evidence supporting your hypothesis, you look at evidence against your hypothesis, and then you form a conclusion. But instead, it looks like this woman's just engaging in motivated reasoning where she's already formed a conclusion that Jewish people control the world and that Hitler was justified in what he did, and now Jewish people are the reason why Americans don't have healthcare or whatever she's saying. And she's not even really reasoning, but to the extent that she's making any argument, she's already made up her mind. That's not clear thinking. That's not being open-minded. That's just justifying what you already believe. So yeah, there's a subset of people. Unfortunately, I notice a big subset of the black population who behave in this way and think in this way about Jewish people. And I actually don't know where it comes from. As I understand that, I'm not very learned on this topic. And my understanding is, Jewish people, especially prior to, honestly, like the last election where a lot of Jewish people turned out for Trump, I think Jewish people historically in America have been pretty progressive and actually more aligned with the Democratic Party, and were a part of getting the 1964 Civil Rights Act passed. And we're actually like advocates of, very progressive, pro-black causes, or at least causes that were ostensibly pro-black, like civil rights protections. So I don't know where this is coming from. I genuinely don't understand. Someone says, "What about Native Americans? What about the Native Americans?" Hello, I don't know what you want me to say about Native Americans. So if you would clarify, let me know what you're thinking here. Yeah, someone said helped establish the civil rights movement. I'm pretty sure Jewish people are a big part of the civil rights movement in America. So I actually don't know why there's a subset of the black population that seems very hostile. Okay, let's check Instagram too. All right, part of the reason I'm sweating is I'm nervous, but part of the reason I'm sweating is because I'm wearing a jacket and it's pretty hot outside. I need to get more like shirts that look good on camera, so I'm not sweating. Summer's here, right? Someone said in the chat, "What a moron, that girl." And it'd be easy to just insult her. I do think that this thinking, the thinking itself, I'm not trying to make it about her. The thinking is quite stupid. And maybe a more academic word for stupid is logically fallacious, and I pointed out the reasons why earlier in the stream. But yeah, I'm just really concerned because a lot of young people don't think, and they don't think not because there's something wrong with them, but they haven't been taught to think. Our education system, it's just been failing. It's just been failing for the last like 40 years. We're falling behind in science education and math tests, and we're not a center of educational excellence outside of Ivy League schools. And I don't know if we ever taught logical thinking, and you can teach it, by the way. Like, you can actually take a class on logic. It's a formal thing, again, going back to Aristotle, but we're not teaching people that stuff. And I think maybe when I was growing up, I didn't learn the foundations of critical thinking. Like I kind of taught myself, and I majored in philosophy, and as part of my philosophy degree, took a logic class. I don't think I even finished it, but even the extent to which I did it was really useful. Might have finished it, don't remember. But I don't think logic was ever really taught broadly in America. But now it's increasingly important because it's the only defense you have against propaganda and bias. So people complain about media bias, and there's tons of media bias, and there's tons of social media bias, by the way, because social media has made everyone their own little reporter, right? Because we are all these little nodes that are sharing information to one another at a scale that we used to not be able to do, right? Like any one of you, not just me, any one of you can put out a tweet and has go viral and influence millions of people. It's pretty powerful. We all have the power to move millions of people in our pockets. That's unprecedented. And yeah, we're all spreading propaganda and being subjected to propaganda. And that's why critical thinking is, I would say, more important than it's ever been at any point in human history. But the quality of our education system is arguably going down, and it wasn't equipped for this information age. So yeah, we're getting a lot of information, but not a lot of proper processing. So yeah, we're all moronic in some ways. We're all idiots in some ways. This was a particularly idiotic argument that she made. And yeah, it needs to be, but it needs to be dealt with more than just name calling, because if you call someone a moron, they're probably not going to change their mind. It's like, at best, I mean, it's like me, when I get called a moron, I like to think, am I a moron? Like, did I make a moronic argument? And maybe that's just insecurity. I like to think it's part insecurity, and also part holding myself to a high standard. Because if I say something stupid, and sometimes I say stupid things, I want to know why it's stupid, so I don't say more stupid things. But merely calling someone stupid or calling them ignorant or moronic is not likely to actually do what we really need to do, which is elevate their thinking and change their mind. I saw this really good clip today on TikTok where this guy, he's this Christian influencer, and he goes to college campuses. It's not Charlie Kirk. It's this older gentleman. He goes to college campuses. You know what? Let me see if I can find the clip. Will you guys bear with me, actually? Or at least I can find his name, and you guys can look him up. I don't know how I can see stuff that I liked or saved. Here we go. His name is Cliff. Cliff Christian. Oh, I don't even know how to pronounce his name. Cliff, Knechle. So he's this Christian man who goes to college campuses and basically tries to convert people to the faith, to Christianity. And you can tell every time I watch this guy, it's very clear he's coming from his heart. And he goes on this college campus and he says, I have friends who are racists. I have friends who are misogynists. I have friends who have done horrible things. He even goes on to say he has friends who are rapists. And all these college students are like, oh my God, like, why are you friends with these people? And he says, well, what am I going to do? Cancel them? No, canceling people is not Christ-like, because if I cancel them, then they can't be exposed to the power of forgiveness. And they can't actually change who they are. And he says, Jesus said, no, you're all sinners. You're all sinners, and you all need to see the light of God. And I think there's something really beautiful about that. And it's easy for us to condemn people. It's a lot harder to convert someone. And it's very hard to convert someone if you're busy condemning them. So yes, as moronic as her statement is, I think we want to stay away from calling her a moron. Zuraka says, Hasidic families don't want to expose their kids to secular education. They pay extra to keep their culture alive because they can't expect to impose that on public schools. Yeah, that makes sense. It's like, yeah, if you have a strong culture, I don't even know if I want to send my kids to public schools with all the stuff that they're teaching kids. I mean, in California, they were just teaching kids about man's not a man and a woman's not a woman a man can become a woman and a woman can be a man. So I totally understand why a Hasidic community that doesn't just have their own way of teaching their kids and installing strong values, but also has institutions where they can do that. They have Hasidic schools. It totally makes sense why they would do that. And I don't think that's evidence of them trying to control the world. I think that's evidence of them having strong boundaries, strong culture, and trying to live in the way that they think is best. And sometimes that incidentally does come at the expense of other people, but I think it's a lot less than people actually realize. And when we have misaligned incentives, we've created a world where when people have misaligned incentives, we assume bad faith rather than just assuming, okay, everyone's just following their self-interest. Sometimes these self-interests conflict. So how can we align these self-interests? But yeah, assumptions of bad faith ruin everything, and they cause conspiratorial thinking like you saw in that clip. Okay. I'm tired. It's been over an hour. So I'm going to go now. Yeah, and someone pointed out that, yes, some Jews are Black, some Jews are Arab, Hispanic. That's also true. Yeah, so we should just be careful when we're speaking broadly about groups, but sometimes we got to. But thanks for watching, everyone. I honestly almost chickened out of doing this stream today. I'm glad I got this off my chest. I hope you got something valuable out of this. Please don't treat anything that I said as something conclusive. I want this to be a part of a conversation. And that's why I engage with comments in the chat live, because yeah, I want this to be a conversation with Kaizen, not Kaizen here on, giving sermons to you guys. Like, I want you to question, challenge, and like, none of us has the whole truth, right? We all have different perspectives and we're all trying to arrive at the objective truth together, and we need each other for that. So that's what I'm trying to do with these streams, and I'm going to continue talking about edgy topics. Sometimes it won't be the hot thing. Sometimes it won't be about the latest political headline, but to me, it's always important. So appreciate you guys watching. Let me know how you liked the episode. I don't even know if this episode is going to stay up on YouTube because of the controversial nature of things, but you can at least find it on X. It'll be on my profile if you want to rewatch it or share it with someone that you know. Peace.